Okay, I'm a little bit further. I haven't unbolted the transmission yet, but I figured I'd give you guys a view of this. With the power steering pump and the alternator removed, you can kind of see that's the end of the K-frame right there. So you can almost see how the engine will just drop right out, because it can come forward quite a bit. It can come over once you take that engine mount off. If you fiddle with it, sometimes you can get it out without even taking the alternator off. I just did it to, again, make it easier on me, because I've done this a few times before. I still got some electrical connections down there at the back by the transmission, but once those are done, I can start unbolting the torque converter, which you can now see when the starter's out of the way, and the engine mounts and the transmission bell housing, and then get this thing out of here. I took the intake off to give myself more room to get it out because, well, that's plastic and it will break. But you can now see the exhaust gas oil-air separator. You can see where it goes down into the castings on the engine block here and here. Those castings are on 96 and newer engines, but they're not drilled through and opened like they are on a 95. Personally, I prefer those engines. They will work in a 95. You have to swap some sensors over sometimes, but there really isn't any difference between a 95, 96, and 98. Those are the three that I know I've taken engines out of and swapped into other years. A couple of things that you do want to take off or be careful about. This tube coming out of the back of the water pump is plastic. Be very careful with it or take it off, because you can break it when you're fighting with this tube here and this tube coming out of the bottom of the cylinder head right next to the thermostat housing. That tube will either rip or be one hell of a fight. Two things that you definitely want to remove are the coolant temperature sensor, which is this right here, and the camshaft position sensor, because they will get destroyed if you're not careful, and I'm not careful. Let's see, what else? This down here is the knock sensor, if any of you were wondering what that might be or have never seen one before. It basically just registers misfires of the engine and tries to figure out what's wrong with it. But as you can see, there's a bit more to do. But I will have this engine on the ground in about 2 hours from this point, because unbolting the torque converter, while it can be a pain in the ass, is not impossible from underneath the car without taking the engine mounts off. And then once that's free, it should be fairly easy sailing, because it'll just be moving the engine up and down to get these bolts out of the engine mount, and you're going to want to take the engine mount off the engine and off of the car. Believe me, it makes a lot more room when you do. Same with this one, this side engine mount, but you can leave the transmission mount where it is. You can leave the wiring harness and stuff pretty much just shoved over here where I've got it. These are the tubes that come across the front of the engine. You can disconnect them from where they go into the heater core, or you can just disconnect them from the water pump and the cylinder head and lay them across the engine like I did. Just remember, be careful, because you're dealing with plastic and it does break. It's old. At least if you're working on a first-gen Dodge Neon, it will be. Yeah, I guess that's it so far. Oh, and be careful of dipsticks. You can break them off. I guess that's it. Forget one thing. You do need a 14 for at least one bolt so far in this process, and that is the lower alternator mount through bolt. Yeah, you need a 14 for that. Otherwise, everything has been 13 or 15 so far, or 10, or 8, like I said. Well, I've hit a bit of a snag. I took the oil-air separator off, so you can see castings that come out of the block that it attaches to. I also took the temperature sensor, the camshaft sensor, and the EGR valve off. But I'm kind of stuck. One of the exhaust bolts back here I managed to get off with 1/2-inch tools. The other one is stripped on that far side. This side I can hammer 12 onto it. That side It's all buggered up to hell. And I can't find my vice grips. So I may not have this on the ground today, but I've still got 2 days to do it, so I don't know, we'll see. Gotta love it when people have their front feet in something you're working on before you get a chance to. Update on the situation. Managed to find one 12mm socket that fit that bolt. I don't know how, I don't know why. I mean, every other 12mm I found didn't work, but for some reason, yeah, that used to be a 13 and it rusted down to a 12, because this other one, well, used to be ½ inch, whatever. This other one is still ½ inch. Anyway, got that out. Got the torque converter unbolted, and I know somebody's had their front feet in it before because these braces that go between the engine and transmission, there's 2 of them. This one and another one, a smaller one. That one had Loctite on its bolts, at least the bolts that go into the transmission. So someone's definitely had their front feet in this before I got anywhere near it. Still got the mount on this side to take loose, and that bolt. That's the only thing that's holding this engine in right now. And like I said, I'm going to be dropping it down the bottom. I'm hoping I don't have to take this part of the engine mount off. That's the inspection plate for the transmission. The bolts for this one are really, really, really rusted. And, well, I think you can kind of see it. Well, maybe not. But in that hole, there's a bolt, or the other side of a bolt, and it's really rusted. But if you're going to pull this out of the top, you can get away with just taking these 2 side bolts off, and then this whole engine mount will lift out with the engine. You just got to clear the transmission, and be careful of the exhaust manifold hitting this cowl, and you'd have the engine out. But like I said, I'm dropping it down the bottom, so I have to move the engine forward and to the left as I move it out. Or down and then out, I should say. Obviously the car isn't quite tall enough to fit the engine out. But, like I said, I've done this a few times before, and you can tilt these engines a little bit and finagle it out without damaging them too much, so that's probably what I'm going to end up doing. Also, that ground wire goes to the valve cover or the top of the alternator. It's got a cover plate that would bolt onto. But you didn't see that because I didn't leave it there to show you. You can also leave most of the engine wiring harness on the engine if you disconnect that plug, but I didn't feel like doing that. So, yeah, I will get this out and on the ground, and then I guess pick this up once I've got the new engine. Well, the engine's out and on the ground, and it's raining. Just started raining as I was pulling the last engine mount out. As you can see, engine sitting on the jack right now. I have to slide it off and then slide it out from underneath the car. And yeah, the valve cover is sitting just above the bottom of the lower radiator core support. So it's going to be fun getting it out, but not too hard. I mean, it's a 4-cylinder, 2-liter engine, cast iron block, aluminum cylinder head. So it probably weighs upwards of 250 pounds, or around there. I did carry one when I was younger, by hand. So yeah, don't do that, by the way. That's a good way to get yourself hurt. But yeah, I get to play with the weather and wait for Sybil to decide whether or not it's going to be sunny or rainy today, because we were supposed to have partly cloudy or rain, and we've had both. It's going back and forth. We've also had plenty of clear sun, just bright and hot and making you sweaty. But yeah, so now I get to wait for this to stop again, then I can pull the engine out and finish the video. It might be in a few minutes. Okay. It's after the last clip the rain stops. Anyway, that doesn't mean it's safe, obviously. Lightning can strike several miles from the front of a cloud, and there was a lot of thunder when this was rolling in, so I might still get struck by lightning. Who knows? Anyway, I remembered the reason that you take off the passenger side tire. I got the engine down before I would have to touch that, but the reason you take it off is because it's got this nice arch in the subframe here that you can slide the engine out through. The car is still a little low. It can go up a little higher for me to slide the engine out that way, and obviously I still have to take the tire off. And with the brackets on the back of the engine, it's going to be an effort to get it around the brake caliper without damaging anything. But it is possible. I've done it before a couple of times. So that's probably what I'm going to end up doing this time, although I am going to get it off the jack, and that's going to give me another 3-4 inches of clearance, so I won't have to move the car up anymore, I don't believe. But, yeah. That is how you can take an engine out of a Dodge Neon without a cherry picker and put one back in. Because you can slip one back in and jack it up the same way I took this one out. I know you didn't see it. I don't have a cameraman, and I don't have a head-mounted camera, so this is the best I can do. But I'll get it out and end the video. 5 minutes later, sun's shining bright and engine's sitting out. I didn't take the tire off. I just cheated. Pulled the jack out from under it, let it fall over, and drug it out on its back. Unfortunately, that punctured the oil filter, and I don't have any shop dry at the moment. So the oil filter is going to drain onto that board instead of my lawn, patchy as it is anyway. And I've got that dam there to keep it from flowing back onto the concrete. Now, I can sit here and scrub away at this with soap and water and hope and pray that I can get it all cleaned up before I get the engine and not have to get all greasy putting it back in, or I can just leave it as it is. By the way, that right there, one of those crossbars that goes from the transmission to the engine, goes right next to that. That is your vehicle speed sensor. Sends your speedometer signal to the dash. That can very easily be broken. Be very careful taking the electrical connection off of that, as well as the 15 millimeter bolt that's right next to there that you have to take off in order to get the bracket off. That 15 millimeter bolt goes right in there. That's one of the ones that somebody hit with Loctite. You can snap that off right there and then you're out. Who knows how much to replace it. I've never broken it, but I've come close a few times. I know to watch out for it, so I do when I'm swapping an engine on one of these. Yeah. So maybe 4 hours, 4.5 hours, I don't know. And that's stopping to record stuff, stopping for rain, stopping for brakes to pull on my vaporizer, and got it out. One cool thing that you guys might want to know about these Dodge Neons is the manual and the automatic both bolt to a flywheel similar to this instead of a flex plate. The clutch assembly that goes into the manual transmission, got one of those somewhere, I gotta find it. The clutch assembly, I mean, bolts with lugs similar to this that are welded onto this torque converter to that flywheel, and then it's got a cable actuated clutch. So it's fairly easy to convert these over to manuals. You just got to convert the wiring harness and the computer. Unfortunately, the wiring harness, the part that goes to the transmission tends to be attached to the part that goes into the dash, so it can be kind of a pain in the ass, because Dodge decided not to put a bulkhead plug on these. Just FYI. And yeah, another difference between the 95s and 96s is the computer. It's in relatively the same spot, it's just the newer ones are bigger than this. And they all are keyed to the transmission, not the engine. You can put a 95 engine in a 96, you can put a 96 engine in a 95. I've done both. So, yeah. And I do have some polyurethane engine mount inserts, because, well, these engine mounts are a little shot. Let's see if there it is. Yeah, that's trash. I have some polyurethane inserts that I had for another Neon. Took them out before I scrapped that one, as well as the suspension bushings. And I'm probably going to end up throwing them into this one. But anyway, there you go. That's A 2-liter single overhead cam Dodge Neon 95 on the ground. By the way, another one of the oil leaks that you might run into is that sensor right there, your oil pressure sending unit. I don't know what it is about them, but they blow out and they leak like a sieve. That right there, which you would think would be your oil pressure sending unit given its location right above the oil filter, is your crankshaft position sensor. So, yeah, and don't break that. Those are expensive. Anyway, keep your wrenches handy.